All right, this is my case study. Section 1, what has happened? A teacher saw James hand David something in the hallway before James was called to the office to address his tardiness. The teacher believed that the students were exchanging drugs and that David seemed very nervous. The school police officer escorted David to the office and James went on his own. James said he had given David something to hold. David did not say anything, was shaking, and cried. The officer searched David and found a pair of brass knuckles. The police officer handcuffed David. James said that they were his, and he made David hold them for him. Both boys were brought to the youth detention facility in handcuffs for possession of a prohibited weapon. Both boys' parents were called by the assistant principal. James' parents said to leave him at the youth facility, while David's mom came to the school right away. David's mom questioned why David was in trouble if James forced David to hold the brass knuckles for him. David was expelled, and within a week, James was back at school. The assistant principal did not fill out the expulsion papers for James and was told he would be given a written reprimand to put in his file if he did not. Section 2, report any legal or ethical issues. So with the legal issues, there was no proof of who brought the brass knuckles to school. It was all hearsay on what James had said. Although David had them when searched, there is no proof he brought them to school. If James was intimidating him and forced him to hold them for him, there could be legal misconduct if they both were arrested. Sorry, because I feel like if that's the case, then David shouldn't have been arrested for that. The school police officer also searched David and did not ask for his consent. Because David is a minor, David is supposed to give consent before the police officer searches him. David was unable to speak, and I believe the police officer searched David before there was any idea that brass knuckles were involved, thus causing a legal issue. The teacher had said that she thought it was a drug deal that was going on, but it actually turns out that they exchanged brass knuckles. But the police officer searched the kid before they even knew that there was a deadly weapon on him. Both boys were also minors, so I think that both sets of parents would be called before the boys were taken to the youth detention facility. There were a lot of ethical issues, I felt like. Why was one student brought to the office by the school police officer, security officer, and the other was not? We have no proof that anything bad had happened up to this point, besides one teacher's viewpoint, and she thought it was drugs, not a weapon. Even though one student has a history of misconduct, the principal was willing to not file expulsion papers for the honor student, but not for the troublemaker. The fact that the school police officer was involved in the questioning and searching that took place seems a bit aggressive to me. The assistant principal should have consulted with the principal and conducted an investigation first. Section 3, synthesize exactly what has happened in a single sentence. 2 students were handcuffed and brought to a youth detention building for having a weapon at school, and the assistant principal is having a moral dilemma about whether or not to punish both students. Section 4, synthesize the facts. So the known facts. People, James is a student. He's muscular, he's tattooed, he's 15 years old. He has a history of fighting and getting into trouble. He is from the South Side, which, according to the case study that we read, was a usually more challenged students behaviorally. David, who was also a student, slightly built 13-year-old honor student who also played the trombone. There was a female teacher who witnessed some kind of exchange between the 2 boys and called the vice principal. Assistant Principal Inman is also involved. He's the one who was in charge of handling the situation. There's a school police officer, and James's mom was contacted, and David's mom was contacted. The place is Rocket Junior High. We know that there's a south side and a north side, and the south side of town is known as the rougher side. There are 900 students in the school. The program it's a grade level junior high. I'm assuming it's a public school, but that's an assumption. It never really says that. Unknown facts. Where's the principal in this situation? We never hear about the principal. We never hear about the superintendent. We never actually get to hear from the actual teacher who witnessed the exchange or other teachers who may have known information. We don't know if there were any other witnesses. And how come the boys' dads are not ever mentioned? I find that strange that it was just the moms. We don't know what race the boys are, so we have no idea if any racist ideas came into play. We don't know what race Mr. Inman is. The place, we do not know where the school is located, and we do not know the demographics. And the program, we do not know the curriculum, we do not know the exact grade levels. We know it's a junior high, but that can mean various grade levels. And we do not know if there are bilingual programs or special education programs. Who are the stakeholders? James and David are definitely stakeholders because of the concern for the future of their education. If they get sent to the juvenile detention and get expelled, then they get put in an alternate education setting, which can affect college for them and just the future of their schooling. The boys' parents are also stakeholders because they are responsible and love their sons and care about their future. Assistant Principal Inman is also a stakeholder. Will he get in trouble for not expelling both boys? The principal and the superintendent should be stakeholders, but they were not even aware of the situation. The director of secondary education who asked for Principal Inman's asked him to make sure he expels both students is involved as well. The community and how this will be perceived. If the public thinks the situation was handled improperly, school things that happen in school, when it gets out into the public, people have perceived things one way or the other. So if the public feels like the situation was not handled correctly, there could be a lot of backlash. Are all the stakeholders aware? Nope. The principal, the superintendent, the boys' dads. And also I was wondering if the boys need lawyers, because if they're getting arrested and put in handcuffs, I feel like that's something that a lawyer should be protecting them with. What other information do I need? I think the biggest problem in this case study that I had was, did Mr. Inman consult with the principal and the superintendent? Did he check if there are cameras in the school? Did he check any of the cameras? Did he look and find out if there were any more witnesses? Can you talk to the boys privately to see if they will offer more information without the police officer there? And can there be a restorative conference to try to fix the damage once we actually find out what happens? Is Mr. Inman showing implicit bias? Do I have enough information to make a decision? No, I don't have enough information to make a decision that has the best interests of the students in mind. I want to make sure that I use my understanding and capacity to undertake and implement the most ethical and legal decision making I can as a leader within the school. Identify your options and possible consequences. What could I do in this situation? The first one I should consider is should not be making any decision or taking no action. I do not think this is the best option because a weapon was brought to school and there is potential for serious injuries with that. Students need to feel safe at school, and if the school doesn't enforce having a deadly weapon like a brass knuckle at school, then you could be putting all the students in danger and the staff. The second to consider is the most comprehensive or liberal action you might take in this situation. I think the most comprehensive action or liberal action to take would be to re-interview the students without the school police officer. Once all information is attained, I would then determine who actually brought the weapon to school and for what reason. I would then pursue the student who is at fault to be expelled with a way to return to school after completing certain steps, like a restorative conference and possible community service. Then identify several intermediate strategies. Do not rule out any option at this stage, even though at the onset it may appear an unlikely choice. I think re-interviewing the students separately without the police officer, but with the principal, would be a good step. Having the students think of consequences or an action plan for their behavior, meet with their parents to discuss consequences and steps going forward, hold a restorative conference with the students, and seek counseling for both students, especially like I'm concerned about David, the honor student who's never been in trouble, that the fact that he shut down and cried, and also James. Like, I think because he's been in trouble before, people automatically assume that he's up to no good, even though he's been trying to turn his behavior around. Evaluate your options. Option 1, the first one considered, not making any decision or taking no action. As I've said before, I do not think this is the best option because a weapon was brought to school and there is potential for serious injuries with that. Students need to feel safe at school. The pros, the 2 boys' future will not be jeopardized if you do nothing because they won't be getting in trouble. And the vice principal, the assistant principal, will not get a letter in their file if they do absolutely nothing with it. The cons to this are that you put the lives and safeties of your students at risk if you do not address the weapon at school. Boys will not know that it's wrong and unsafe to bring a deadly weapon on school grounds. And your trust with James, which you've been building, will forever be changed. Because although he's glad he isn't being punished, you are giving him preferential treatment. And also, one of the ways you show love and care about your students is holding them accountable when they make a mistake. If James was actually responsible for bringing the brass knuckles in. David will also not trust Principal Inman because he does not have his best interest in mind. It is not keeping him safe. If James was threatening him and making him hold the brass knuckles, then David essentially is sort of being bullied or threatened into doing something against his will. But we're not sure if that actually is the truth or not. Section 7, evaluate your options. The second option to consider is the most comprehensive or liberal action you might take in this situation. I think the most comprehensive action to take would be to re-interview the students without the school police officer. Once all information is attained, I would then determine who actually brought the weapon to school and for what reason. I would then pursue the student who is at fault to be expelled with a way to return to school after completing certain steps, like a restorative conference and possibly community service. The pros to this decision is that both boys are treated equally and fairly. It helps to fill in any missing information gaps. So I don't feel like it was investigated properly and you don't have all the information you need. And it also gives the boys a way to make amends and to come back to their regular school setting. The cons to this, the school would have to make changes to the current discipline policy because they do have a zero tolerance policy. You would have to come up with some changes to that. Evaluate your options. Several intermediate strategies. So I think re-interviewing the students separately without the police officer but the principal would be a good step. Have the students think of consequences or an action plan for their behavior, and meet with their parents to discuss consequences and steps going further. Hold a restorative conference with the students, seek counseling for both students. The pros to this, both students get to speak without a police officer present and will hopefully open up and tell the truth. I think the relationship that Mr. Inman and David have will allow David to open up and tell the whole truth. I also think James would be willing to talk in a less stressful setting. If restorative practices are put into place, then the boys have a chance to be part of the healing process and they can have an open conversation and come up with ways they're going to make things right. So in restorative practices, if you cause harm or you do damage, you have to come up with ways to make it right and restore the trust that is broken or the harm that was caused. With counseling, both students would have someone to talk to process their emotions and feelings about the issue. And the cons would be if Vice Principal Inman does not follow the policies put in place, he could get in trouble. Even with restorative practices, there might not be any way around the arrest and the outplacement for school. Section 8, choose the best option. Making a sound decision requires a final reflection on what is the best decision under the circumstances. I really think the best answer lies in finding out more information as to what exactly happened. I also think that there should definitely be restorative practices implemented so that even if one or both boys made mistakes, the harm is repaired. I also think that the final decision has a way for the boys to come back to their regular school. How can your decision be implemented with the greatest care and attention to the concerns of all stakeholders? I think it has to start with communicating with the teacher who first saw it. Make sure that both boys have a chance to speak individually. Make sure both sets of parents are kept informed. Vice Principal Inman needs to make sure to speak with the principal and the superintendent of schools. I also think the director of secondary information needs to be kept informed. Have